Okay. Okay. Welcome back. I hope you enjoyed the conference so far and that you could see what our cities have been doing over the last 3 years. I heard some very positive feedback so far, and I'm very glad that they could showcase the wonderful work that they have done within REFLOW. But let's start our session on social impact assessment, and I would like to call in the two panelists. Please come. So we have Bender, which is the co-founder of Home Earth, and Stefan, which is the head of impact at B Corp. And I won't pronounce your surname so that it's better that you do it yourself. You can come here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, Emil.
And I would like to start our session by, if you could say a couple of words about yourself, your work, and how it relates to social impact assessment.
Do you want to start?
Yes. So my name is Steve Kellehaugen. Actually, Steve Kellehaugen Wagner, so that's really not a very international name. I think it's very important to mention I'm not head of impact at B Corp. I'm head of impact at B Corps in the Nordics. Only the Nordic movement, I'm head of impact.
I promoted you
yes,
on the spot.
I'm really glad. Yeah, that's really nice. Yeah, so I'm Stefan, and I work with tons of companies, mainly SMEs, in measuring their impact across the entire company. So not only focusing on specific products or supply chain, but the entire company across operations, and also what we call impact business models, looking at specific designs and structures and business models of those companies and how they are above and beyond industry standards, as we call it. So that's mainly what I do. I of course, also represent B Corp here in the Nordics, talking about impact. I also do a bit of consulting. I've helped, I think we counted last month or something, approximately 150 companies measuring their impact across the company. And then what I also do is that I teach consultants, internal champions, board members, etc. in the entire B Corp world, the B Corp framework. We have tons of management systems related to impact, both in terms of looking at the company's actions, but also the SDGs and how the companies actually can contribute to reaching those very important goals.
Perfect. Thank you, Stefan. Emil?
Cool. Thank you. My name is Emil Benedens. I'm a co-founder of a company called Home.Earth that we started in January last year. Home.Earth is a real estate company that is founded because we see some challenges in the urban landscape right now that are not being tackled by the existing ecosystem. I see several young people in the room today. Everyone moving to a big city to study has encountered the challenge around the lack of affordable homes to live in. And when we see such a rapidly growing urban population as we do in most cities in the world, really, we need to do something about that. And the way we tackle this issue today is by building a lot of homes that are not sustainable. And that goes for both the social sustainability and the planetary sustainability. So those of you working on circularity in the construction sector and around construction materials know that while everyone is talking about it, we are very far behind on that issue. So we're trying to set up a new kind of real estate company that has a very long-term dimension. We make it foundation-owned to control the purpose of the company. We are in the process of becoming a B Corp as well, to ensure that we apply a holistic, impact framework to it. And we see the sweet spot that we really need to fit in being the social impact space. we see an increasing trend of real estate and construction companies embracing planetary sustainability. But on the social side, we are very far behind, and we're still at the case study in the annual report that looks nice and with smiling people stage. So there's a lot of work needed there. In the company, I drive a lot of our work on what we call impact management. So basically how we develop and approach impact measurement, reporting, and basically the impact strategies we choose to apply in our projects. And before that, I built a social mobility charity called Project Access, running headquartered in London, working with university access for less privileged students. Sit on the board of that today. So my experience today will be a mix of, call it, applied social intervention measurement, and then very, very early stage, I have to say as well, a very early stage impact management in Home.Earth, because at present we have 48 apartments, so we're not experts yet, we're very early in our journey.
Very interesting. I'm sure we will going to have a very interesting conversation. And before we start, I would actually like to illustrate the work we have done in REFLOW so that it can be also a starting point for our conversation. I only have a very compact slide that can be a bit scary if you see it like this. But so starting from the left-hand side, you can see that our vision had the social element of circularity as an overarching topic, because we believe in the early stage when we wrote our proposal that there cannot be an environmental sustainability if we don't link to the social element. Especially in cities, if citizens are not actively involved in the decisions for what the main strategy for circular economy would be, then there is no effective implementation of the strategies. And we have our set of indicators and also the tools that we implemented for circular economy. We decided to, in order to devise indicators to manage impact, we divided indicators into two categories. On the one hand, we have the ongoing performance assessment, which is both the environmental one, where Metabolic, one of the partners of the project, took the lead, and the social and the economic performance measurement that we did here at CBS. For our work, we use the theory of change. We use the graphic that you see at the bottom left, where we actually we started by telling the narrative of change that all the cities wanted to go through with their project, and based on that, to identify the key goals that they wanted to reach, and we identified indicators based on that. And that was for the ongoing. We have both the environmental and the social. And now, currently, as we speak, we are finalizing the social impact assessment, which is, on the one hand, an ex post assessment of the work that the cities have been doing, but also an ex ante projection of what would be the benefit, the societal impact, if the project that we started will be completed. And in that sense, this means that the cities will have also a tool that would allow them to express in monetary terms what would be the return of their investment in circular economy based on the actions that they undertake in REFLOW. And this is why we chose a topic that is a tool that is called the social return on investment, which allows you to do exactly this. If you invest one Danish krona, €1 in your intervention, in that sense, you would get X amount of euros in the future in terms of savings, in terms of social return, and we are actually translating some of the soft issues into harder measures in that sense, and financial proxies in order to do that. But in this endeavor, we are also encountering some I wouldn't say issues, but of course there are elements to be considered that I would also like to discuss with you as experience in Petitjean in the field. For example, we are right now considering some element called the drop-off. So how long will an action last? So if you consider impact, sometimes you tend to assume that a positive impact would last and but we'll have no end. But in that sense, we also need to consider maybe the time frame is shorter, and that actually reduces the return. And also, there are other elements. There could be trade-offs. There could be also elements that would happen even if reflow didn't happen or didn't took place. And this is actually where we are right now in the calculation. And this is why I think it could be a good starting point, because I would like to know what is your experience in measuring social impact, and what are the trade-offs, the pros and the cons that you are encountering in your world.
Yeah.
I don't know. Who wants to start? You can start.
Well, I can tell you from a business point of perspective that we in the Nordics don't really have the traditions for businesses to involve in the local communities. That goes in terms of, creating a diverse workforce, for example. We don't really want, it's not that we don't want it, we just don't do it. We don't measure on it. We don't really engage as corporate citizens in the local community. Basically, we're just quite poor at it, basically. So what we're doing in terms of B Corp, we have our B Impact Assessment, which is our free online management and measurement tool in terms of what we call impact. So instead of measuring on social return on investments, we measure in points.
Okay.
So we do it like very basically, and then depending on what kind of structures you have in place, both in terms of operations, but also in terms of business models and structures, you get additional points. And what we can see is that companies, they don't really engage in their local communities. Even though that we're seeing that there is, of course, we have our environmental issues. I don't think anyone disagrees on that. But we also do have rising social challenges that we see. Even in a city like Copenhagen, we have people that are stressed, people that are lonely, people that are depressed. So what we're trying to do and mobilize is how can we, as businesses in local communities, actually come together and drive changes within the social area and aspect as well. Some of the things that we're seeing is we have something called Cities Can Be, so that sparks out of the Latin American B Corp movement called Sistema B. Started out in Rio and gathered all governments, NGOs, businesses, and of course local entrepreneurs and young people in Rio. Started out in Rio Can Be, and then figured out how can we actually collaborate in terms of reaching this goal that we have, which means that we want Rio to have a prosperous and equitable economy for all. So then putting all these kind of axes together and then defining this end goal, and then more or less setting them free, saying then collaborate the way you want, and then see how can we then facilitate some kind of, we have the end goal, we don't have the pathway to do it, so we set that pathway free for themselves to create collaboratively.
Okay, perfect. Thanks,
Yeah.
Steph.
I think if I should start answering the question, I think I would start with saying that working with urban development, working with real estate means working with such a diverse set of social issues, but also such a diverse set of challenges. So we're not at a stage yet where we can quantify things in economics or even in points. So we basically started with the same conclusion that you drew in your introduction, that approaching impact holistically, combining economic, planetary, and social aspects makes you realize that there's a lot of value that is left on the table today. There's a lot of social issues you could address quite easily and at a quite low economic impact if you knew about it and if you shaped your classic planetary sustainability strategy in a way such that it also incorporated some of these social elements. So I think, again, the key here is as well, and also to an audience that I imagine is very focused on the planetary side, that taking a holistic view, a view that incorporates the different elements will make you realize that in a lot of places you can make up improvements that are not trade-offs. You can Pareto optimize if someone studied economics. I think the second thing that we're trying to do when it comes to social issues is really to start with people. A framework that you somehow have up there, and I'll comment on two of them, but having a user-centric approach or applying design thinking in your approach to addressing social issues is critical. One of the biggest problems, I think, in real estate development and urban development right now is that a lot of the metrics we measure are set by investors. And while investors can be great at doing this, they can also be less great. And too often the issues they've identified or the metrics we report on have not started with people and with the social challenge. So applying a user-centric framework, I think, is absolutely key, and that's one of the things we're trying to do, and really one of the reasons why we decided to acquire our first property very, very early on and start having real users, real tenants, facing real challenges that we can speak to and learn from. I think the final thing I'll add in the introduction here is this theory of change model, or logic model, or call it whatever you have. This is critical, I think, when it comes to social challenges. The theory of change model is one of the few frameworks that acknowledge that different kinds of impact has different kinds of time frames. So certain things are outputs that happen immediately when you make the investment. We can offer a rent subsidy to someone, and that means they will have 2,000 kroner more in their pocket every month, which is an immediate output that will benefit their life. But expecting safety to improve in an area the next day is vanity. Expecting mental health to improve, or loneliness to decrease, or some of the other challenges you mentioned in your introduction, is vanity. And that's why the theory of change framework is amazing, because you can start distinguishing what are outputs that will happen simply by affecting our approach, doing our activities. What are outcomes and impact that, as you said yourself, require us to think, okay, what partnerships do we need to build to ensure that this activity is followed on? How do we evaluate these things and intervene if the outcome or impact we desire is not being fulfilled because our service offering, or call it our activities, fall short of really realizing that impact?
No, that's really interesting. I see that despite working in different settings, I mean, we have similar challenges.
Yeah.
But one of the things that we heard while listening to you on the first day was actually that companies sometimes are ahead of municipalities when it comes to social impact, to the interest, or in also circular economy in general. It seemed by Stefan's first words that it may or may not be like that. I would like to know whether you see that there is an interest in this within business.
I think we take pride in the Nordic region. I know a lot about the Nordic region, not so much about
but
the world in general. But I think that we all agree that we have huge environmental issues. I also think that we agree that we have some kind of social issues in our society, but I think we have a tendency to look towards governments and say, this is yours, this is your problem to solve, and then we have the environmental course to solve, where you should support us, of course. I think we are on the verge saying, well, companies are slowly starting to become more socially aware, not only looking at, of course, ending poverty throughout their supply chain, which is, of course, also very important, working with your suppliers on that, but also how do we actually engage in our local communities? How do we become citizens, corporate citizenship, we are calling it. So how do we provide pro bono services to some of our local NGOs? How are we looking at local procurement? That's not only a municipality thing that you can drive, seeing that couldn't we buy locally. That's also something we see companies do more and more, looking at that. And then, of course, also diversity. Of course, we have like these great pillars of inclusive companies. One of them is a B Corp by Sekili. We have Specialisterne, we have All Ears. We have Danish companies that are really baking this into their DNA of we want to create a labor market for everyone. What I see is that regular companies, or that's not even regular companies, that's B Corps. I think they're quite special. But they don't really do anything about looking at, well, of course they want to have like this inclusive workspace, but it's just something that they talk about. They don't have any policies on it, they don't have any practices on ensuring it. And what we can see when we are looking at different kinds of, when we're investigating the access to labor markets on the behalf of minorities, for example, it's way easier for you if you're called Alan to get a job than if you're called Mahmoud, for example. Which I think it's some of the things that we're like neglecting maybe. And what I see is that if we are driving this kind of social issues as companies, especially, could be, for example, how can we support local NGOs? How can we support the municipalities? How can we create a labor market that is for all and not only white dudes in their early 30s, 20, I don't know how old you are. But how can we actually then create a labor market that is for everyone and that is also inclusive? There's like tons of things and perspectives on how we do that. But I think just starting from saying that we would actually encourage everyone to apply for a job here is one. And I think that's such an easy way to get started, but there's so few companies that does this. So we have like a huge untapped area in the whole social sphere of Nordic companies that really can, create positive impact on both local societies, but also broader society by, starting working with how can we as a company in our daily operations work on these kind of social issues, because work is like it's a huge part of our lives.
No.
Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you, Stefan.
I don't think I have much to add, to be frank. I don't know the municipal or public work well enough. I think there's two comments to make from my point of view. One is our political system is governed by 1-year budgets and 4-year election cycles. So when we agree, all of us, it seems like that a long-term mindset is absolutely critical to achieve long-term impact. Then obviously that makes it harder systematically to do it. So I would think that being the one reason that you have the private sector often being ahead, or even the academic sector being ahead of the public sector. I think the other thing is, I would not imagine that your 28 partners have signed up to this project because of their kind-hearted spirits. I think there's a lot of business opportunity, a lot of money in nailing this circularity challenge. We see it in real estate, again, as I introduced with. Everyone is talking about circularity right now. Everyone is saying that they approach construction in a circular way. But when it comes to it, the way, for example, that we can claim that we have a very circular construction sector in Denmark is because all the construction waste that is produced, which is around 10% of all materials, that goes into roads right now. We make it into asphalt, and then we call it circular, which is mind-blowing and frustrating, and one of the reasons why projects like these are important. So I think there's a big financial upside, which is probably why, as well, you see the private and academic sectors being ahead of the curve.
Perfect. Thank you so much. I think it's really interesting and engaging to see a different perspective on that. But it's also interesting to say that when we create our narratives, both from the project perspective, public but also private perspective, we tend to have a positive approach towards the impact that we create. So we only, in our narrative, we naturally are biased, we may say, and we tend to underestimate which are the trade-offs or maybe the negative impacts that we produce. And this is one of the criticism that, for example, is traditionally moved to the SROI or other technologies that can be used. I wonder, what is your opinion on that, if you have any experience or if you have any tips or advices on how to deal with that?
I don't know if I should start. I think this is the tricky area. This is where we have not found any answers yet. And again, that's back to our approach, that when you measure across different kinds of bottom lines, it's difficult to integrate the things. The one thing we've tried to do, which we announced last week, is we will try to take Kate Raworth's donut economic approach, if you've heard about it before. Basically an economic framework that combines social, planetary, and economic impact in one model. If you shoot under the donut and hit the hole in the middle, you don't fulfill your social conditions, you don't hit the social foundation. But if you go outside the donut, you overshoot your planetary boundary, so you want to basically hit that sweet spot in the middle. It's a fantastic model because it's one of the only models that manages to tie these things together. And it's been applied at city level as well now, both in Amsterdam, in Copenhagen, maybe soon in Aarhus in Denmark as well. We're trying to zoom in once again and apply it on specific construction projects, which should start giving us absolute values for what does social sustainability mean, what does it mean to have a decent job, what does it mean to have good indoor climate, what does it mean to have a thriving community that counters loneliness and some of the other trends we see. But at the same time, how do we address these challenges without doing it at the expense of our planet, which we so often unfortunately do today. So that's what we're doing there. I think the reading recommendation I will make is looking into Daniel Fujiwara, an economist, working a lot in Denmark actually as well, and Kirsten who's doing work in New Zealand, looking at cost-benefit analysis and actually trying to economically quantify different social interventions at a public, like government spending level, which is extremely interesting. How they try to put a dollar figure to how much does it value society if we like rehabilitate a person, how much does it value society if we get a person into employment, but also some of the less obvious interventions you can do in society around happiness or decreasing loneliness, or some of the other things we've talked about. If they manage to pull that off, which it seems like they're doing right now, there's an open source model. It's simply an Excel sheet on the Ministry of, like, on the government's website in New Zealand. If they manage to do that, we can actually start making much smarter decisions on how we spend money. The question again is, how do we link the planetary and social side? And I think we're still, unfortunately, a couple of years from the end state there.
Perfect. Thank you, Emil. Would you like to add?
Yeah, I just have one thing. We have, like, of course, I always get back to the B impact assessment. That's my that's my little baby. And I think so. We are also trying to, like, make some kind of standards that integrates both the environmental and social aspects and measure those in points. And from our perspective is that, well, we fully acknowledge that that's not a perfect tool. It has tons of flaws. I can, like, start here right now and then finish tomorrow. With all the flaws that it contains, but I think we're just, like, very humble, saying that yes, we acknowledge that it has flaws. This is the best at this time of life. We continuously collaborate with different actors. From our perspective, working with standards, we'll, for example, look very much towards Global Reporting Initiative, Future Fit, World Benchmarking Alliance, and those kind of actors. Start collaborating with them, and always get, wiser and smarter, and know that this now is the standard, and this now is better than the standard. You can do this and this. So continuously learning, and then not saying that we want to wait for the perfect solution before we get started, but we have this knowledge. We right now know this. So let's get started with this, and then let's just be humble, saying that, well, if you have some kind of feedback, criticism, inputs to what this tool can do, standard can do, then please tell us, and then we will revise continuously. So that's what we're doing.
And if I can add to that as a less
sure?
biased, so we're not a B Corp yet. I have no stake in the movement other than really appreciating the work. You mentioned negative impacts, and obviously the best thing you could do would be to do a full-on materiality assessment. The number of companies who can pull that off without external help are quite limited. And for us as well, even though we're approaching it and probably will do a proper materiality assessment at some point in our activities, the simpler version was to go into that B assessment and start filling it out. It's extremely comprehensive in mapping your flaws, and it's one of those, one of the few tools, if not the only one, that help you identify challenges you have in your supply chain and in how you treat your cleaning staff and everything basically between here and the moon, which is fantastic because it's so easily applicable. So any private actors out there who are thinking about starting to get an overview at least of where you have positive and negative impacts right now and where you can improve, I think the B impact assessment is a really, really simple and really effective tool.
Actually, it's not only private companies that can do so.
Everyone.
So yeah, everyone can do it. Everyone, even you as a person, can say, well, how do I? It gets a bit complex, but everyone can go in, fill it out, start working with it, manage their impact. Also, we see some municipalities, some public actors as well, go in, use the B impact assessment to see how can we actually also drive some kind of impact, improve our own internal impact in this municipality, for example. We've worked together with actors in Fynen.
Okay, yeah.
And they took this, what we call it's a benchmark. So they filled out the entire B impact assessment, and then they looked towards where can we actually also improve. So the B impact assessment is for everyone to use, and the B Corp certification, however, which is correct, is only for businesses. But the tool itself is like our gift to the world. Everyone can use it.
No, but thank you. That's really interesting. And I think we have touched a couple of times about the difference between public and private in time horizons, but also in impact. And I would like to know, from your experience of what your hunches is, what are the differences of, if you, based on your experience with businesses, if you could give some advices to our cities or to projects like us that work with also municipalities, given that, you must see many municipalities that fill in your impact model and you have some ideas.
I think my main advice would be try to break down the silos. I think especially working here in Copenhagen, it's such a huge organization, the municipality. I could imagine that that's the same for all bigger cities. And what we see from a company perspective, or when I work with companies, they really want to, take part in these kinds of initiatives that drive some kind of social impact, because it's good for themselves as well,
Of course,
and
yeah.
good for society. So it's a win-win situation, but they just don't know how to approach the municipalities. So I think that's the biggest issue I see right now, working from a private perspective into a public perspective, is that you don't know where to get started. It's a big castle, and you cannot find the entrance. That's this big, the entrance. So that would be the main thing that you could do as a city, I think.
Perfect.
Well, I think I agree, and I think building on that, I think there's two things to it from my point of view. One is breaking down conventional wisdom, or not wisdom any longer, and one is really on methodology and figuring out how we can help public actors, municipalities, for example, take a more systematic approach. On the first point, you mentioned employability and the fact that I can get a job easier than Mahmoud. The funny thing is, I spent this morning reading some of the latest statistics on employability in different groups, and it's actually non-Western immigrants that are getting the most jobs right now. Their employability share is increasing. Their intergenerational social mobility is increasing massively compared to Danes and non-Western immigrants, and it's so funny that we still think that the problems in what we still call ghettos in Denmark, by the way, which is also interesting to think about, is like we still have a lot of municipalities thinking, oh, we need to avoid immigrants, we need to avoid low-income populations because they bring the problems with them, where in fact a lot of these things are changing quite rapidly at the moment. So I think the first things that municipalities could really do is being very careful with applying conventional wisdom to some of the challenges, because again, one of the most effective things we can do in real estate right now to be more sustainable is build smaller units.
Okay.
But municipalities have this idea that smaller units will mean lower income populations, which is to some extent true, but when you look at demographics, you see more and more singles, you see more and more low income people. So the need really is for smaller, cheaper units. So being mindful that like small units should not equal scary, it should equal an opportunity to rethink things. And then if you then have some actors helping them with the methodology and the systematic approach, which again to us, as I would said in the beginning, really it has to start with the social issues, and only when you know the issues, then you start identifying the impact areas, and only then you start identifying your strategies. Don't jump ahead and start with the KPI table, because if you've already decided what the right solution is before you know the problem, then you might end up solving a problem that no one ever felt.
No, this is really interesting and good advices instead to keep in mind. But and I guess that this also brings us to another consideration. I mean, during our talk, we mentioned a number of different guidelines in some way. The donut economic, and of course the B Corp. You have your own, which is of course a leading one. The SROI. But the GRI and so on and so forth. I guess we have a plethora of guidelines that could confuse, both private and public actors. And in that sense, I would like to have, 5 cents from you, and also to open up the problem, if that is the case, in our discussion, because that could also be something that cities as well as private actors are facing.
Yeah.
You're the bad guy.
I'm the bad guy,
exactly.
yes. We've made a standard, and I think at some point I tried to gather all kinds of standards looking at social and environmental perspective. I think I reached 130 when I gave up. And it's like building, I think it's La Sagrada Familia. It's been like, they worked on renovating for like 100 of years, like finish that building, Make a building, say this is it, right? So just that's what I hope it's going to be, the B impact assessment. If it's not that one, that's going to be fine. It's going to be better. But make a decision. Try to streamline. Find out what's actually best. What's most suiting. Of course, there can be different standards depending on sectors, depending on private, public, NGOs, of course. But try to streamline as much as possible, because if you are a company, if you are something from municipality, people from the public sector, governments, that can be quite complex and confusing to navigate in. If you're a consumer, if you're a citizen, that's going to be almost impossible because you have your daily job, and then you have all these 130 different standards that you should also familiarize with and learn how to navigate. That's going to be nearly impossible. So I hope at some point we can like say these are the standards that we're using, and that's the way we go forward. But of course, that's going to be like,
Yeah.
and that's a hope, that's an ambition, and I think also that's where academia comes in, saying that these are the ones that we're pointing at.
Yeah.
So we actually went a step ahead. We hired Alec over the last summer to take not 130 frameworks, but the frameworks that were big enough to have weight in our community, in our ecosystem. And then we asked Alec to map all the metrics and figure out where they aligned with each other. He worked for 2 months in a room. He came out with the longest and biggest and most colorful also Excel sheet I've ever seen in my life, with the conclusions that there's a lot of alignment between the different frameworks, which is fantastic. And it's frustrating that we need different frameworks to get to the same answer. But the second conclusion is there's also still a lot of misalignment, and there's a lot of diversity in how we measure the same thing. It's like life cycle assessments, something as fundamental is still calculated in different ways across countries. So if you look at a building and want the CO2 impact per square meter, then you do it in one way in Denmark, you do it in another way in Finland. In the Netherlands, you do it per person instead of square meter, and you don't do it in CO2, you do it in global warming potential. And all this diversity is one of the reasons why we're so far behind, and it's also one of the reasons why there's so much invested capital who can claim to be sustainable without being. And so you mentioned academia. I think actually the European Union has done a fantastic job with the new Sustainable Finance Disclosure Regulation, where you actually start going in and setting the rules of the game, defining what does sustainability mean, when is a financial product sustainable, is it an Article 8 product that has a sustainable goal as a side goal, is it an Article 9 product where it's actually the focus of the financial product, and so I think this will help push it. And with that, and with the, I think capital, I think has a big role to play here, so that's also why I mentioned that. When you see capital starting to flow towards something, I actually think that we will start having a process of cleaning up these frameworks, and as you say, exactly agreeing, we have 2 different building certifications, let's agree that this is the right one, and this is actually the wrong way of doing it. I will hope that you do that. Obviously, there's an economic incentive in selling certifications, so there's a reason for these organizations to continue fighting, but hopefully that competition can also help raise the bar. So there's good and bad things. We will, I think, continue navigating a lot of different frameworks in the near future. Standardization would be great. I think the European Union's work is really good. I'm looking forward to see what comes out of this project as well that can further that agenda. And until then, it is frustrating, but it's better than not having tools. It's rather having a plethora of a toolbox and having to hire a couple of Alexes in the process. And if Alec is listening to this, he did a great job, and he got a fantastic job afterwards working with sustainability. So I think it was worthwhile for him as well, hopefully.
No, excellent. I fully agree. I mean, on our side, when we try to identify indicator, we also needed to do Alex's job in some way. So I have Justina here and others who did that kind of job, and metabolic as well. And also when it came to impact assessment, honestly, we needed to take a tool that was originally used by NGOs and adapt it to the public sector, because currently also within European project, impact assessment is usually qualitative and not so defined, and all the nuances of impact are lost in that, which is actually a pity, because this, I think, it's one of the way to continue the investment, not to have some investment that actually only lasts for the time of the project and that end. But with that said, I would like to know, are there any questions from the audience? Anyone has any curiosity? You can use the technology or do in the old traditional way and just raise your hand and your voice. Yes?
I wrote this also with Menti, but
Okay. Yeah, please do that.
I would like to know how you
Great question.
Yeah.
I can start.
Yeah, please.
We don't have the obvious answer yet, because I think this is also about taking an iterative approach, because no one has really given an answer yet. You have, again, the B Corp assessment, for example, giving you one answer. If we look to buildings, you have certifications paradigms like DGNB that you use to stamp a building and then say, well, it's gold, without really knowing what that is. We've tried to identify in this donut approach we're developing over the next 3 years in collaboration with the team of researchers. So it's not crazy people like us who take a much more, call it a pseudo-scientific approach to it, but instead of group of researchers. But we're starting to identify some areas that are critical when it comes to urban development. One is around ownership. Is it affordable? Is it accessible to all? Is it a community that you feel ownership of? If you feel like there's fragility in your living situation, you are much more stressed, which is also like, documented in a lot of economic research. It's around inclusivity and diversity. Do we have room for all kinds of people? Are you able to be yourself? Do you feel safe in your community? It's about health and well-being. Is your indoor climate healthy? For example, like there's no daylight in lecture theaters like this. It's very easy to also document with research that if you increase the indoor climate with more daylight, less air pollution, less CO2 in the atmosphere, less noise pollution, and so forth, then well-being increases a lot as well. And then we see also community being a big part of it. So we both try to design and program our sites in a very intentional way. So we ensure that neighbors meet each other. We ensure there's a plethora of space for communal activities and common spaces, because we see trends where you increasingly rely on less private space and more shared space, which is also hopefully something we can use to combat loneliness. But also activities in the space, bringing in culture and doing some of this, bringing in art, having space for small workshops, which are also some of the things often being pushed out of cities. So those are the 4 buckets we look at right now, but they may change when the real experts come in and challenge it.
Yeah, we have like tons of different ways. I can say, looking at from a impact assessment perspective, we measure, well, if we can group it into 2 categories. We look at how is your impact on your workers and what is your impact on your local community. When we talk about local community, we talk, of course, about how does your company reflect the local community. So we're looking at, of course, diversity in the workforce. We also look at diversity in managerial position, which is not that many. And then when we look at board of directors, it's quite critical, actually. Then we, of course, also look at how can you start working with small and independent local businesses that are minority owned, for example. Do you even measure on that? And I can tell you this much, that no, they don't. Then we also look, as I said before, on corporate citizenship. So how do you engage with other industry players? It could be on collaborative actions that could drive some kind of positive change. Could be policymakers, could be other companies. Do you do pro bono work? Do you provide data to academia, and etc. Then we look at the supply chain, the social side. We look at, do you train your suppliers? Do you have suppliers in low-income markets? And also, of course, as I said, the ownership in that. If you are buying from developing countries, how do you work with them in terms of payment to their workers? Do you track? Do you pay a premium? Etc. When we look at the worker side, we're looking at the financial security, of course. We look at the career development opportunities within the company. We look at the engagement and satisfaction. And then, of course, we have the impact business models, both in the worker section and in the community section, which is looking at ownership opportunities for employees, so employee-owned companies. We're looking at workforce development. We're looking at how can you actually, do you have like a specific structure in your companies that allows for, and programs in place, of course, to allow for companies or people that has some kind of chronic barrier to the labor market to become a part of your company. I would check out Grayston Bakery if you don't know them already. They're like super cool. And then, of course, in the community part, we're looking at how do you drive local economic development. We are looking at micro-distributing and franchising opportunities for underserved people. We're looking at, of course, supply chain poverty alleviation within the supply chain. So how can you lift people in your supply chain up in terms of poverty levels, working in direct trade, for example. So we're looking at very different categories within this section. But I would also advise you just to go in, open up. I don't know what kind of positions that you're in at right now in your life, but you can just open that one up. Either go to your own company, say, do we actually do some of these things? And if not, it could be a great guideline to when you're looking at a new potential company to work for. What are they actually doing within these areas?
Perfect. Thank you. I would like maybe just a couple of words of what we did in REFLOW when it came to identify what social value is. I mean, social value is a huge question. It's, of course, social value means many things, and traditionally value is primarily financial, and this is exactly what we try to escape from this. But also, there are multiple actors that define what value is. And in that sense, we, instead of coming with a framework that had a predefined understanding of what value, of what social value was for us, we actually work bottom up with our cities as we build the theory of change and as we build the indicators, because that is where the narrative emerged. So some cities actually told us that throughout their the actions that were undertaken, then they could take immigrants, for example, and those ones that maybe had more issues with citizenship and so on, they could build a competency profile that could allow them afterwards to actually take up jobs within the city. And this is purely a social impact, even though this is a circular economy project. And we have many examples of that. And I would say that I couldn't answer it in a univocous way, so there's no one definition of value when I see the experience that we went through. There is one methodology maybe that we used to assess it, but when it came to nailing down what social value is, it's contingent, and it really depended on the process and on how a bottom-up approach would be built within each city and what they value as social. But it's a great question, and I mean it really raises a lot of thoughts. So thank you for that. I think we are a little bit behind, but we can take another question before closing. Yes, I think. Did you ask that? Yes.
Oh, I didn't ask this one.
Okay.
If someone else wants to.
Yeah. So how do we ensure that social impact assessment don't just become the new greenwashing? That's also a great question.
I think it already is, unfortunately. Again, I mentioned the case studies in my introduction. I think it's really difficult to measure social impact, as we talked about, because measuring it in financial terms is difficult, measuring it in QALY, so like quality-adjusted life years, is difficult, measuring it in well-being is difficult. So as long as it's difficult to measure something in a like financially cheap and easy way without being very skilled, I think we will continue seeing a lot of, call it social washing or red washing or whatever it should be called. I think it's about, like we know the greenwashing situation now, so we need to be really good at calling out when we see these things, and I think there's a growing movement also, like B Corp people and in general a lot of organizations in this space, also the certification paradigms we talked about before, that help standardize these things and can help us call out when things are simply nice words with no action. But again, social impact and also planetary impact is still too often just going to the local beach and picking up trash for one day and then you think you saved the world. I think we need to do more. So I'm not super optimistic on that, but I think we're getting in the right direction. And I think measuring it and having a standard that we apply everyone to or hold everyone accountable to is the key.
Perfect. Would you like to add?
Yeah, and I totally agree. It's going to be an issue. It is already an issue. From our side, from our point of view, we don't have any verification of companies using the B impact assessment, but if you want to become a B Corp, you go through a verification phase. So all the questions that you answer during a B impact assessment will be verified in some way. So you have to be able to document that what your claim is actually also something that you can prove that you've done, that you have done, and not aiming to do. So that's, I think, a very important thing to have in mind, that we're looking at what have you actually done, and not what are you intending to do in the future. But once that's said, do companies still red wash, green wash, whatever, and then still get through? would be surprised if there wasn't anyone within our community as well that are overclaiming and then producing false documentation. You cannot. Well, some people are going to cheat.
No, that's true. I fully agree on that. And of course, third-party certification, audit assessment, independent assessment is really important, that increase in transparency, but also attributing agency to citizens in our context would be important, so that they can actually have a voice, and some of the boundaries are removed from them to actually call out on this situation. But that would be important. But unfortunately, we are already late, and we're already 8 into our break time. But you can actually meet also Stefan and Emil if you're outside, if you want, and afterward then ask other questions, because I think it's a very interesting discussion. But unfortunately, we have to stop it right now. But please put your hand together for our panelists. It was really interesting. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
It was really good. And now we have a break, 5-minute break, and then we'll start. But we have a small present for you.
Oh, nice.
I hope you like chocolate.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Delicious.
And thanks so much for the discussion. It was really lively, and I think it went
good
well.
questions.
Pretty well. Yeah.